So I know you're a huge fan of Universal's attempts to reboot their monster universe.
Man, okay, whatever. Continue.
So they are doing a theme park based around the Universal monsters.
I assume it's going to be in Florida?
Yeah.
Okay, I typed in Universal Monsters Park, and the top result is Dark Universe at Epic Universe, Universal Orlando. What is Epic Universe?
I see that too, and when I try to click on it, it tells me I do not have access.
All of these monsters have become pop culture icons and are a big part of Universal's history.
I mean, that's true, but has there been a good Universal monster movie in the past, almost 100 years? No. I mean, I haven't seen that Invisible Man yet. I know that was popular, but then that's the same guy that did the new Wolfman, and I heard that got pretty bad reviews. And from my perspective, as much as I am a fan of, the original Universal monster movies, it seems like a really weird property to build a theme park around. I would be interested to see what they do, but I don't really see there being a lot of general public interest, especially given that these newer movies keep tanking. It just seems like a weird thing to throw your money into.
Just needs to be a little bit better than the Lionsgate theme park that we talked about.
Well, I haven't been to China yet, so I don't know what that's like. And we have to watch what we say here because we don't want China to ban our channel over there.
Do people in China even watch our stuff?
Actually, do people have access to YouTube in China? I don't know. Let us know, Chinese viewers.
Okay, hang on, I found something. Monsters Unchained, the Frankenstein Experiment, will be a dark ride with Kuka arm ride vehicles. I don't know what that is.
Yeah.
This ride takes us through Frankenstein Manor, where Dr. Victoria Frankenstein, the great-great-granddaughter of Henry Frankenstein, is working on a plan to control the land's monsters. But things go terribly wrong, and the classic monsters are unleashed and are not happy with her.
Interesting. I see something about a monster makeup experience, an all-ages face painting and temporary tattoo station. That sounds awesome. I can't wait to, pay hundreds of dollars for a plane ticket and whatever the tickets cost to get in so that I can get some, Wolfman face paint.
These animatronic figures look pretty good.
It's probably an AI video.
Well, I was thinking, I don't know if it's actually real, though, but they're talking to the designers of the ride, so I think so. 14 animated figures. Yeah, from a technical standpoint, they look really good.
Again, I would be interested if it isn't stupid, but I just don't see it being a good financial decision on their part.
So what did you check out this month?
I watched Kiss of the Dragon from 2001, which is a Jet Li movie where he plays Jet Li in France as an undercover cop, I think, trying to take down a crime boss or something.
So this was in the prime of Jet Li's Hollywood presence, right?
Yeah, I would say Western, because this is a French production, or at least co-production, and then he also did Unleashed around the same time, and that was both Luc Besson doing the, in the producer role, and at least co-writing, I think. But this one said it was a story idea by Jet Li, so maybe next time they should get somebody else to write it, because this one was not great. He ends up helping a prostitute, played by Bridget Fonda, whose daughter is being held by some gangster guy, and the gimmick of the movie is that he uses acupuncture needles to incapacitate people. But he only does it sometimes. They introduce it as if it's going to be the thing that he does all the time, but every time he pulls it out, I was like, oh yeah, I forgot that he does that. The movie as a whole, especially with the Bridget Fonda side of things, acts like it's serious and weighty, but it is absolutely ridiculous. Fights happen in this movie for absolutely no reason. There's a scene where he opens up a door, and there's a room full of people that he has never seen before, and they just start fighting. Everybody just starts fighting. It makes no sense. There are lots of people in this movie who don't understand how guns work, which explains why they rarely hit anything. The way they fire their guns, they're doing the kind of weird thing where they crook their wrist, where they're kind of holding their gun sideways, but not in not like turning the gun horizontally or whatever, but it's like firing the gun at a 90-degree angle to their arm. It's weird. Like trying to shoot around angles and stuff. It doesn't work like that.
According to that one movie, it does.
It wasn't terrible, but it tried way too hard to be cool. And I mean, that was the time period for that. And it ended up being really dumb at times with those attempts. And Jet Li's character manages to make it through the entire movie without ever having any suggestion of a personality. By the end of the movie, I had no idea what his character was like. I had no idea what his thoughts were. he's just kind of there. And I don't know how much of that is Jet Li's acting. I don't know how much of it is that they kind of forgot to put that into the script, but it really could have used something there. And I remember I saw this movie back when it first came out, and at the time I loved it. I thought it was awesome. So I was an idiot back then because it's kind of dumb. So yeah, if you want to check out a Jet Li movie, go watch a different one. I watched Without Warning from 1980, which is an inappropriately titled movie because the main characters are explicitly warned not to go out to this lake where people keep dying, but they go anyway because they're stupid. So you've got these aliens that look kind of like sand dollars that fly through the air like frisbees and attach themselves to your body via these tendrils that stab into your skin, and then they kill you. It's a pretty low-budget movie. At the beginning, I thought it was going to be really bad because the dialogue was so awful, but I was surprised that it turned out to be pretty decent. Given the low budget, it really wasn't terrible. The 3 big-name actors they managed to get were Martin Landau, who plays a crazy Vietnam veteran who's convinced that aliens are trying to take over the world. Cameron Mitchell, who only shows up at the very beginning as this crazy father who takes his son out hunting to try to like turn him into a man or whatever. And at one point, his son turns away from him and he pulls up his gun like he's going to shoot him and then ends up lowering it, and then they both get killed by the aliens, so none of it matters anyway. But it's a whole weird subplot that I thought that's what the movie was going to be. I thought they were going to be the main characters, but then they die. And then Jack Palance is another kind of crazy guy in the town who he's the one that warns them not to go there, the main characters who are a group of dumb college students. And there was one scene, I made a note that there was one actor that I thought was really good, who was a scoutmaster out with his troop, and they get lost in the woods, and his comedic line delivery was really good. The problem was they didn't give him enough of it, and he's just a minor character, but when he was on screen, he was good. So you've got those frisbee aliens killing everybody, and then in the last 15 minutes of the movie, you get this kind of reveal of what's really going on, which is basically the plot of Predator, where this alien has come down to Earth and just wants to hunt humans and uses those frisbees as weapons or something, even though they're also alive. The final confrontation with the main alien is very anticlimactic because it just stands there and doesn't do anything. And they just kind of keep yelling at it and are like, oh, what do we do? And I think Martin Landau, is the one that goes first, and he's like, I'm going to go confront it. And everybody has guns too. They could just shoot it. But he goes up to it and is like yelling at it and whatever, and then he gets killed. And then I think Jack Palance does the same thing. I can't remember. So the frisbee alien effects were done by Greg Canham, who is a legit makeup artist.
Oh, they're going to say he's a legit ultimate frisbee player.
And the main alien is created by Rick Baker. So you had some legit talent behind the movie somewhat. It just didn't have enough money, and it needed a little bit more to the script. But it really wasn't bad. I was impressed, given how cheaply the movie clearly was made. So I wouldn't go out of my way for it, but it was not bad. I'm going to mention one that I didn't get through because somebody requested it in the comments. I tried to watch Arcane from 2021, where the first season came out in 2021, which is a League of Legends show. I don't know anything about League of Legends.
Yeah, why did you watch this?
I had somebody else also that kept telling me to watch it. Actually, a couple people that I knew that were watching it. So I decided to try it out, and I did not care for it. Not knowing anything about League of Legends doesn't seem to matter. The show really does feel like it's meant to be able to be watched on its own. And the other people that I knew that were watching it didn't know anything about the game either. But I hated the character designs, and I really, really hated the exaggerated animation style, where every character's movement is like super Disney-fied, over the top. It's like Neil Adams was the one saying, hey, you need to push it farther. They're not emoting strongly enough. And I'm talking about like when they're walking around and stuff, even like everybody's movements are so cartoony. It was just too much. I could not do it. The story itself felt very bland, and I don't know. It just did not interest me at all. So I'm sorry for whoever suggested it, but it was not my thing. I watched
The Doorway to Hell
from 1930, which is of course a gangster movie.
Could they even use the word hell in 1930 in a title like that?
I guess. Yeah, I was kind of surprised. So you have this suave young gangster guy back in Prohibition days who forces a bunch of gangs to work together with him as their leader. And of course, at first they're like, yeah, we're not going to do that. But he forces them at gunpoint and everything. But it turns out he's a good leader and everything's running really smoothly and everybody's happy. But then he gets married and decides he wants out of the life of crime. So he moves down to, I think, to Florida. And of course, in his absence, everything falls apart and the gangs are fighting each other again. So they say, we need to get him back. And in order to try to force him to come back, they try to kidnap his little brother, and they accidentally kill him, the little brother. So he does come back, but he comes back for revenge. And everybody's fighting, all the police are fighting the gangs, and the gangs are fighting each other. It was not a bad movie, but it wasn't anything special. I did think the way it ended was interesting. You expect a big battle at the end, but the way it ends, you already know what's going to happen, and you don't need to see it. And so they don't show it to you, and instead they kind of tie it into some dialogue that characters had earlier. I don't know, I liked it. It was more creative than I expected, that ending. But I could see a lot of people being really disappointed that you don't get the big battle at the end. It was cool to see Dwight Frye. Speaking of the Universal Monster movies, he's in a ton of those. He plays a small role in here. And then I think this was one of James Cagney's earliest movies. He has a role too that's also not super huge. But now I can say I've seen 2 James Cagney movies after this and The Gallant Hours. I watched The Invisible Man Appears, which is a great title.
Yeah.
From 1949. This is a Japanese movie with effects by Tsuburaya, who did the Godzilla movies up through the 60s. So you have these scientists that are trying to figure out how to turn people invisible, and you have this, I don't know if he's a gangster or what, but this asshole guy that wants this jewel necklace. And partway through the movie, a couple of the scientists disappear, and this invisible man shows up and starts trying to steal this necklace. And they keep the identity of the invisible man secret for most of the movie. Like, you're kind of supposed to be trying to figure out who it is, which was a cool idea. And the movie was okay. It was, it worked for what it was. I actually liked the ending. They kind of went in like a poetic direction, I would say, with the ending, which I thought was cool. I thought the last shot was really cool. But the movie was just okay. I don't know. It was an Invisible Man gangster movie. It was fine. I did like the scene in terms of effects. I liked the scene where he was talking to another guy while he was invisible. And you just see him smoking a cigarette. So there's like the cigarette and the cigarette smoke coming out when he's breathing. And that's it. That was cool. So that's everything I watched. I read I, Robot by Isaac Asimov, which came out in 1950, but it's a collection of short stories that were from the 40s. They were originally written and published as separate stories, but a lot of them involve some of the same characters. So he kind of combined them together and wrote a kind of framing story where the entire thing is presented as a robo-psychologist talking to a reporter, I think, who is asking her questions about her history with robotics. Mostly it's kind of little scenarios of these robots kind of running into problems with their programming. So this is the book that introduces the 3 laws of robotics, which are referenced in every other sci-fi thing out there. And it's the robo-psychologist's job to figure out how and why the robots act the way they do when those 3 laws get crossed in some way. So it's like the first law is the robots cannot harm a human. The second law is they have to prevent harm from coming to themselves. And the third law is they have to obey any commands given by people. But the first law takes precedent over the other 2 and the second one over the third one. So they're like, if you command a robot to kill somebody, it won't do that because that disobeys the first law, which is more important than the third one. You can kind of compare that to the way programming works in real life, but this, of course, was back in the 40s. This is also where you get the positronic brain concept, which doesn't actually mean anything. The characters in the book say that they don't even understand how the positronic brain works. That's just what they call it.
Yeah, that's how it works in Star Trek, too.
Yeah, basically. And so a lot of it is trying to figure out why the robots came to the conclusions they did or why they're acting the way they are based on either the orders they were given or things that happened in their circumstances that, I don't know, kind of turned them in whatever direction they're going in. So a lot of it doesn't really make sense if you, from like a technical perspective, well, especially from a practical perspective, it makes no sense. The fact that these robots are being used out in the field when people don't understand how they work, don't understand why they're doing what they're doing. They're malfunctioning all the time, apparently. And a lot of these stories have a pair of guys named Donovan and Powell, whose job it is to test new robots in different situations. And these 2 guys, they're there just by themselves, just the 2 of them. They're always arguing with each other and insulting each other, and they're completely incompetent at their jobs, and they have no idea what's going on most of the time. And they're the ones that are out testing these new robots, and for some reason, they keep they keep getting more jobs to do the same thing when these robots keep malfunctioning in some way and doing stuff that they're not supposed to be doing and not being able to do basic things that they shouldn't need AI to do. They should be able to just, say do this and then that's it. That should be the one law that they need in a lot of these situations. It seems to be that the reason they have these other laws is because of the public's perception of things, where the public needs to know that these robots, that the first law is that they cannot harm a human. Because for most of the book, robots are outlawed on Earth because people just don't want them there because they don't trust them, they're afraid of them. So they're mostly used for, difficult jobs out in space, basically. Which you shouldn't need AI to say, go mine this mineral. I don't know. It's pretty basic stuff. So from a practical real world perspective, a lot of it doesn't really make sense. But the book itself is really, really good. The ideas are really interesting. The entire thing is super entertaining. And especially the stuff with Donovan and Powell, their interactions are really funny. And all 9 stories are good. There's not a single one that doesn't work. I think if anything, the weakest part of it is the framing story because it doesn't really come together. It's introduced well, and it feels like it's going to make sense as it goes on, but then it just kind of peters out. So it doesn't really have a conclusion, but it's definitely worth checking out. Like I said, all 9 of the individual stories are really good, and it's just a well-written, entertaining, interesting book. Even if it's not necessarily super plausible or realistic, the ideas themselves are interesting, and I think there are ideas here that do relate to AI in real life. For anyone out there who's vaguely interested in things like that, I would recommend checking it out. It's a really good book.
I'm not surprised. You would praise it being AI yourself.
Our viewers don't need to know that. They're supposed to be convinced that I'm real. So let's keep that hidden. I read The Kaiju Preservation Society by John Scalzi from 2022. People discover an alternate dimension inhabited by giant monsters. Basically, evolution has taken a different path than it did on our Earth. And it is accessible sometimes when there are nuclear explosions or radiation. It seemed unclear to me exactly how that was supposed to work, and I think it's because he didn't really figure it out. That in itself runs into the same problem with things like yesterday's Enterprise, where how did these photon torpedoes cause a rift in time or whatever? If something that small did it, then there would be things happening all over in space. So if nuclear explosions and radiation are opening up the barrier between dimensions, then stars would be floating in and out of different dimensions all the time, and stuff would be happening everywhere. So already the kind of background concept doesn't really work in terms of the way he explains it. I think part of the problem with this is he explains just enough that it doesn't make sense and doesn't work. But from his perspective, and he pretty much tells you this in the book, he doesn't care if it makes sense or not. It's just supposed to be a fun story. And I hate that attitude so much. There's a point in the book that you would have hated where they explain, or they try to explain, why if so many people high up in different governments and even just companies and just rich people know about this alternate dimension, why the general public doesn't know about it, how they managed to keep it secret. And they say it's because the idea is too ridiculous for anybody to actually believe. And one of the characters refers to it as a reverse lampshade, where lampshading something is when you point out how ridiculous it is as a way of getting people to accept it. And one of the characters says, does that actually work? Do readers actually fall for that? And the other character says, you'd be surprised how often it does. And then it goes on from there. Oh man, it made me mad. That was the point of the book that made me the angriest. But the entire thing was a huge disappointment. He didn't come up with a functional idea in the first place, but the stuff that was supposed to be fun just wasn't fun. It was kind of boring. Almost all of the characters have the same personality, which is Buffy character, where they're all snarky and spouting out witty dialogue in quotation marks, and sometimes even finishing each other's jokes, or like character A will set up a joke, character B will pay it off, character A will push it farther, character B will go back and push it another step, and it was just too much. People do not talk like this in real life, and it was irritating. And it was even worse because there were so many times that a character would make a joke, and it would literally cut to another character smiling at the joke or laughing about it or whatever. It was painful. And from just kind of a general plot perspective, there's no conflict in the book until like the 3/4 mark. Everything up until then is just kind of introducing the idea and saying like, hey, look, there's giant monsters. Isn't that cool? And even up to that point, and well, through the entire book, the kaiju themselves are very vaguely described where you don't really know what you're looking at, and they don't really do a whole lot. There's one kaiju that plays the biggest part, which of course is named Bella after the protagonist from Twilight, and I'm not making that up. She's named Bella after the protagonist from Twilight. Mm. And there's also an Edward, and the monster just sits there for most of the book. There are other references to things in here that are just as dumb and out of place. There are references to Godzilla movies and stuff like that, but they're mostly at the very beginning, and they don't necessarily even make a lot of sense, like calling their airship the Shobijin, which are the little Mothra fairies. Why is that the name for the airship? It doesn't really make sense. So there's not a whole lot to the book. He's going just on the premise of, hey, look, giant monsters. But then he doesn't really do anything with it. The characters are irritating, and the concepts don't make sense. And the final thing is that it was written during the pandemic, and that's fine. You can reference that, whatever, that's fine. But the book goes super political with things that have nothing to do with the plot, that have nothing to do with the ideas. All of that stuff was extremely out of place and irritating. Even if I agreed with some of it, it just does not belong here. So, yeah, I did not like this book. This was a Hugo nominee. It's a perfect example of how the state of the whole Hugo winner, everything is just not good right now. I talked about Bone Shaker before. That book was also nominated for a Hugo, and that book was way worse than this. That was an absolute piece of trash. So yeah, this is why I don't read a lot of new sci-fi and fantasy books. Going forward, I will talk about more recent ones, because I need to be kind of up to date on what's going on for other reasons. But if it were entirely up to me, I wouldn't read that many of them because they just don't appeal to me, and they usually don't turn out to be very good. And that describes this one. And I've been playing Fallout New Vegas. I still feel the way I did before, where I definitely don't like it as much as 3 or 4. But I do like it. It's a good game. It just feels like it doesn't pull you into the world the other ones did. And I've also been running into something a lot where the way the dialogue choices are presented, I didn't have this problem with the other two, or at least I don't remember having it. There are a lot of cases where it'll give me a dialogue option that I shouldn't have yet because I don't know what it's talking about. Like, for example, I'll be able to ask a character what their opinion is of somebody else, but I haven't met that other person yet, so I don't even know who that is. That's been happening more often as I've been getting farther into the game. So it seems like they didn't quite get things in order on when dialogue choices should show up. And I am at least finding more areas that have a little bit more variety in terms of the environment, so that is good. I do wonder how much of that is from the DLC, because I do have the version with all the extra stuff in it. But yeah, I don't know. It's okay. I'm enjoying it for what it is, but I definitely don't feel absorbed the way I did with 3 and 4. I don't feel like I'm in that world. It doesn't have that sense of simulation to it, but it's still a good game, so I am going to keep playing it. And that's everything I checked out this month. So what did you check out?
I watched Horizon, An American Saga, Chapter 1 from 2024. This was the movie that Kevin Costner announced as a 4-part theatrical Western epic, and people seemed to not like it, so naturally I checked it out myself. And it turned out that this was not a movie. This was a theatrical presentation of the first part of a miniseries, which was most apparent at the end, because the end is a 3-minute montage with only music, and it's clips from the next movie of all of the characters of what's going to happen. So literally, it was just missing a next time on Horizon.
Oh, man.
There were a lot of plot threads. They were not related to each other in terms of character arcs or locations, so it feels like you're watching 4 or 5 different episodes slammed into the same runtime. And because the movie has to keep jumping between them all to make sure that they're all established, it actually leads to none of them feeling established. Costner said that everything will line up in the end, but I would have been really ticked off if I had gone to see this in a theater. It would be like I had paid to watch a preview of the movie I thought I was going to see. And even outside of that, there was nothing groundbreaking here. It was a very by-the-numbers pioneer Western. I can't see it changing much. if he even manages to make all 4 parts. I remember hearing there was a lot of financial difficulties getting even this one off the ground, but I don't know if that's actually true. But something that is definitely within his control is finding better child actors. There are 2 main ones in this movie, and they are both terrible. The direction they were being given seems like that was terrible too. So I'm looking forward to part 2. I watched The Name of the Rose from 1986, which is a murder mystery set back in a 1300s Italian monastery. And Sean Connery is a friar who shows up, and while he's there, there's this guy who dies mysteriously. And he's smart, and he uses a bunch of deductive reasoning to try and figure things out, and more deaths happen while he's there, so it leads pretty much everyone there claiming some kind of demonic presence, and it's complicated by the nearby village of peasants who don't really like the church being all high and mighty, so Connery has to navigate all of those waters while he's trying to figure out what actually happened. And he's there with his sidekick, played by Christian Slater, who had to be, I don't know, younger than 20. His voice was cracking all over the place. Pretty weird. The movie was okay. It was very 80s, dramatic, theatrical. Ron Perlman was already deep in being oddball characters. He was pretty goofy. And F. Murray Abraham was rocking some really intense eyebrows. It's based on a book, and I wonder how much subtext was lost in the movie, whether by format or intentionally, but I can't say I'm invested enough to find out. I watched Dark Star from 1974. I assume you've seen this one.
I have not.
This is the first movie that John Carpenter directed, and from all the posters, I always assumed it was a horror film, but it's not. It's a comedy. It starts off pretty slow, but it gains some momentum as it goes on. The pacing is not great, and there are definitely more than a few stumbles, but after I finished it, I said, okay, I didn't waste too much of my time. Some of the humor resonated well. Most of the deadpan stuff, the things that were in your face supposed to be funny, flopped pretty much every time. And Dan O'Bannon co-wrote, edited, and acted in this. And Dan O'Bannon would become one of the go-to sci-fi movie guys in the 80s after he wrote Alien. And there are definitely shadows of Alien in this movie. I mean, this whole thing where this guy's trying to find this alien, but because the budget's so low, it's a beach ball with feet. And I read in an interview, O'Bannon said, after writing that part, I said, this could actually be a real movie, but serious. And that's kind of where Alien came from.
I get the impression that Dan O'Bannon is not really that great. He just kind of gets by on, maybe not as bad as like a David S. Goyer or something, but he gets by on having his name attached to certain things.
Yeah, and I've seen a bunch of the movies he's been involved with, and outside of Alien, they're kind of whatever.
Yeah.
I was more interested to find out that Rod Cobb was involved in Dark Star.
Yeah.
But I would not go out of your way to watch this movie. I watched a movie from 1986 called Club Paradise. And this movie sounds like it's set up for a comedy home run. So it's 1986. You got Harold Ramis directing. You got Robin Williams as your main character. And he's supported by a slew of Second City television players. You got Eugene Levy. You got Rick Moranis. Andrea Martin. So you'd say, okay, how can this movie fail? This should be a movie everyone should be like, oh, I love that movie. It's so funny. But it's not. It totally flopped. Robin Williams is a firefighter who gets injured on the job. In the opening scenes, he gets blown out of a building, which is pretty funny. That part was not supposed to be funny, but it was.
Okay.
So he takes a settlement, and he goes to live down in the Caribbean. And he teams up with a local to make a tropical resort vacation destination. But they don't really have any money, so they essentially have to trick people into thinking it's way better than it is. And once the tourists get down there, that's where most of the comedy comes from. And all of the tourists, like I said, are Second City people, so they're over the top. And really, the only one that landed for me was Andrea Martin. And the movie also turns into a small guy versus big guy scenario because a bad guy wants to do massive development on the island and squeeze out the locals, and he's in cahoots with the local government, and this fake resort is the last thing standing between them and their goals. So they're like, well, we gotta get rid of it. And the movie can't really find its footing or balance between the tourist shenanigans, the looming threat of the takeover, and then they throw in a political corruption thing too, which eventually turns military. There's too many balls in the air, and the movie can't decide which one is the most important. And even Robin Williams feels like a regular guy, because there's not much for him to work with. Robin Williams' strengths and his best roles come when he's able to cut loose and things focus around him. But because that can't happen here, he's just some dude, and that is not a recipe for success. The whole thing was a dud. So I cleansed my palate and watched Becket from 1964, which is a mostly dramatized telling of Henry II's relationship with Thomas Becket, and how Becket's influence affected the course of England's history. And it was based on a play, and it felt like a play. And even the guy who wrote the play was like, yeah, I just, kind of made some stuff up. So Richard Burton is Becket, and he's a friend and advisor of the king, played by Peter O'Toole. And the king makes Becket Lord Chancellor, which rubs everyone else the wrong way because they don't like Becket, the fact that he's a Saxon, and the fact that he doesn't let them do whatever they want. And the king says, well, suck it up and deal with it. And they're both douches. They're very well spoken, but they're still both douches. And Henry cares more about himself than the affairs of state, and he's always clashing with the church because the balance of power between them. So Becket is pretty much always putting out fires with strategic diplomacy, and when an archbishop dies, the king says, oh, damn, well, Becket, you can just be the next archbishop, so we don't have to worry about this struggle of power. But after Becket becomes the archbishop, he becomes the less of a douche, and when one of the king's friends kills a priest, and the king's like, it's not that big of a deal, Becket says, actually, it kind of is that big of a deal. So the king turns against him, and Becket has to flee to France and then Rome, and the king is ticked off, so he starts to plot against Becket. But Becket was always the smart one, so he neatly sidesteps all the king's traps, and Becket eventually ends up protected back in England. But then the king inadvertently, kind of, gets Becket killed, and he feels guilty about the whole thing because Becket was still his friend, and that's pretty much the end of the movie. Richard Burton did a good job. Peter O'Toole was a little over the top, but it was good when he got into his insults against people he didn't like, because they usually went on for a long time, and they were good insults. I will have to use them in real life. It was a decent movie. Very 60s. Dragon Ball DAIMA is finishing up this season, and it goes pretty quick because the episodes are still the length of TV show broadcast episodes, so, they're not over 25 minutes, which makes everything go very quickly, and there's not much filler. I don't know if there are any plans to continue after this season, but it is Dragon Ball, so my first guess would be yes. But Toriyama is not around anymore, so I don't know. I imagine they'll want to keep going just to make more money, but the last time they tried to do something without Toriyama did not turn out very good. So I imagine if they do continue, the quality will probably falter. I finished reading The Naked Truth, which was the fictional autobiography of Leslie Nielsen, and it was funny. And the jokes went all the way through the end. Even the appendix, there were jokes throughout that whole thing, too. I mean, if you want to read something pretty dumb, it's hard to recommend this book. I don't know, unless you really like Leslie Nielsen or The Naked Gun. I played Riven, the remake from 2024. And Riven is a computer game originally from 1997 and the sequel to Myst. And I was super excited to hear about this remake because for this series, they'll remake Myst, and then they'll stop. Then a few years later, they'll remake Myst, and then they'll stop. And then a few years later, they'll remake Myst, and then they'll stop. I'm going to say it one more time because it might have happened 4 times. And then a few years later, they'll remake Myst, and then they'll stop. Riven was way bigger and way more involved than Myst, and Cyan had the talent and budget to really go to the next level after the success of Myst. So they did. I think both Myst and Riven are fantastic in their own ways. So I was very pumped to hear about this remake of Riven. And I bought it when it was released, and it's at my folder of unplayed games for a year. But I finally got around to it, and I was not disappointed. It's probably been a good 20 years since I played Riven, but I was positive as I was going through that some of the puzzles were different. You have a screenshot camera in-game, which is really nice, but I was still taking notes and jotting things down in a physical notebook, because sometimes it's just easier that way. And there were some notes I was writing down because I was like, I remember this being important, but things have been changed and tweaked, so some of the things I thought were important were not actually important this time around, and the new puzzles felt very much like they belonged. I'm going to have to go back to the original to see how much things actually changed. But regardless, this game is way harder than Myst. That was actually one of the biggest complaints back in the day because people were expecting another Myst level game. But there's way more ground to cover, there's way more things to learn and understand, and you really have to work to see how things are connected and fit together. In Myst, 90% of the areas are self-contained. You show up in a new place, you figure it out, then you take your knowledge back to the hub. But here, you have 5 different islands that you can traverse freely, and the pieces of information you gather are not necessarily used right then and there, so it makes it feel much more organic. This was, I think, originally released as a VR game, and then later I think it came out just, for us normal flat screen people. I think it would be really cool in VR. I've played some stuff in VR, and I could see this one really hitting the marks in terms of that type of gameplay, but, I don't have, like $1,000 to spend on gear to find out.
My VR headset was I don't know how much it was, but it was way less than $1,000.
Well, I hate to break it to you, but they just put in a pair of those blue and red 3D glasses and told you it was VR.
Oh, that explains things, actually. Okay.
So Myst was originally point and click, is like a slideshow. And they started implementing free exploration once the technology allowed it. I think the first time was Real Myst, but you still had the ability to revert to the static point and click screens. I think for the 2010 remake of Myst, they finally removed that option, and it's not here either, which isn't the end of the world. But it wouldn't be horrible to still have it, and there were some paths that actually seemed easier to miss since you were constantly moving and turning, because that still screen sometimes forces you to give everything kind of a cursory glance before you move on. Visually, even back in 1997, Riven was really, really good. And even looking back, they're so good. So truly, this free exploration version with updated graphics and whatnot, it's not like you're going from super flat, poorly cel-shaded mid-90s tech to modern visuals. Because when you think of 90s computer graphics, you usually think of something that looks really shitty.
Mm-hmm.
But this did not. I think Riven has aged better than Myst visually. And when you look at side-by-side comparisons, obviously the remake looks better at Riven, but you're also looking on a mega high resolution monitor. And back in the day, we were all on CRTs at a very low resolution. But even so, that game looked great. And I backed the Kickstarter that Cyan did back in, 2018. Okay, it doesn't feel like it was that long ago. Where they released all of the Myst games optimized for current hardware and operating systems, which is probably not true anymore. They probably don't all work. And I at least poked around in Riven then, and it still looked great. Something that did bum me out for this remake was the loss of the FMV character videos, because at certain points, characters would either talk to you or run away from you, and it made it feel more real. It added a lot. And I know when they remade Myst, they initially replaced all that with 3D character models, saying, well, it's not really possible to integrate that original footage because of the format or the resolution or whatever. But then somebody did it on their own using whatever tools, and Cyan was like, oh, I guess you can, and then they patched it in officially. But for Riven, it's not even an option, because there's, one, a lot more character footage, and two, they interact with a lot of the digital elements, more so than Myst. So it's likely a valid limitation here, but it doesn't look good. It is 2024. These 3D character models look like they're from 20 years ago, so maybe Cyan should have given that responsibility to somebody else. Story-wise, I really got into the whole Myst lore back in the day. I even got those novels that built the whole history and the world, and all the Myst games are connected. And even if you don't know the story, there are journals and letters and clues that help spell out what's going on in each iteration. Even understanding why you, as the protagonist, are in the game matters. Some of the changes made in this version integrated the puzzles into the story better, because I do remember thinking back in the day, somebody said, I have this really cool idea for a puzzle, but I don't know how it fits. But it's really cool, so I'm going to stick it in. I played a good chunk of Myst 3 back in the day too. That's the one with Brad Dourif, where you can get killed by Brad Dourif if you do things wrong. And I probably went through 4 once. I never got around to 5 or Uru, which was the online one. But Science stopped handling everything after Riven, and that felt very obvious. And if you're interested in development of Myst or Riven, there's a lot of documentary material floating around on the internet. A lot of it created by Cyan themselves, just talking about the thought process and challenges they had to overcome. It's very interesting. And they're not afraid to talk about the process or the product. I think I still have my 5-disc PC version of Riven from 97 somewhere. And it had to be 5 discs because there are 5 islands. And back in the day, if you took a tram to a different island, the game would stop, it would pop out your CD tray, and it'd say, please insert disc 3 because you're on this island. And you have to push it back in and wait.
That's awesome.
Yeah. But even that version, the box art, the design of everything fit with the game itself. That's pretty much why I kept it. It's very cool. And I've been playing a lot of Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, and the Deluxe version came out in 2017. Mario Kart is a really good party game, and I played Mario Kart 8 solo a lot on the Wii U when it came out, but there are a bunch of tracks on the Switch version that were not around before, hence the Deluxe. So I've been going back and getting trophies and stars on all of the cups at all the different difficulty levels, and I'll probably jump into the time trials too, although I have pre-accepted the fact that I probably will not do all of the 200cc trials. So if you buy the vanilla Mario Kart 8 Deluxe game, you get 32 courses, plus what was originally Wii U DLC, so you're up to 48. And then if you pay for the booster course pass, you get another 48 courses. It doubles the size of the game, so you got 96 tracks. And Mario Kart 9 has been teased as a Switch 2 launch title, and I'm interested to see what direction that goes in. Because I think the Switch era in particular has taken established franchises and just put so much content into them, like this Mario Kart or like Smash. So maybe we'll get more of the Mario Kart stuff in the Nintendo Direct in April.
Just every next thing that you say, I can hear that check from Nintendo just kind of waving there in the background on your desk.
There's a line item in my budget that just says Nintendo. It lives above the one that says food. I'll say the soundtrack from this game is really good too. Nintendo can really step up on the sound front compared to pretty much everything else, in my opinion. If someone has another developer they can recommend music-wise, let me know, because I would be interested. And that's everything I did this month.
So we're still waiting for our Star Trek Generations videos to get cleared past copyright.
We're 3/4 of the way there, because we had to split it into 4 parts.
And we'll see if that even works.
And we've recorded a few episodes of Buffy.
So those will be coming very shortly.
We've also recorded First Contact, so that's where we are.
You're welcome for all the hard work we put into sitting around waiting for things to happen, and then realizing that we have to actually do it ourselves.
Thanks for watching.